Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome to the news in brief from Dhabi TV. Sharon reveals Israel's intentions to expedite the construction of the separating wall, calling on the Palestinian Authority to end what he calls terrorism and continue to reform, saying that the roadmap is the only hope for peace, reiterating his country's decision to expel Arafat. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority describes his speech as an escalation aiming to destroy the peace process. A wave of Israeli raids in Gaza leads to the martyring of at least 3 Palestinians, 2 of whom were members of Hamas. Meanwhile, many others were injured in the incident. From Gaza, our correspondent Hazem Badaru.
The situation is taking a dangerous turn in the Gaza Strip. In retaliation, Israel carried out a helicopter raid, bombing a car carrying Hamas members, martyring 3 of them. And an F-16 airplane bombed a home that was believed to be used by Hamas activists to manufacture explosives.
Korea denounces the Israeli raids, saying that they are blocking efforts to reach a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Hamas promises fierce retaliations. An American soldier was killed and 5 others were wounded in an attack on their convoy in the city of Fallujah. The campaign against the smuggling of Iraqi oil through the Gulf Sea continues. The coalition forces, in cooperation with the Iraqi forces, arrested 80 people and confiscated 47 containers. The subject of terrorism and trade are on the agenda of the APEC summit in Thailand. Meanwhile, Bush criticizes the Malaysian Prime Minister for his comments on the Jews, saying that it was wrong and creates divisions. Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency reached an agreement that may pave the way for Tehran accepting inspection of its nuclear facilities. The foreign ministers of Britain, France, and Germany will visit Tehran tomorrow to conduct negotiations with Khatami regarding Iran's nuclear program. This is the end of the news in brief. The coalition forces in Iraq confirmed that a U.S. soldier was killed today and 5 others were wounded in an attack in Fallujah, west of Baghdad. The U.S. forces in Iraq arrest 19 Iraqis, saying that 4 of them were prominent members of the former Ba'ath Party, adding that they found a weapons and explosive warehouse during their search campaigns. In response to the attacks against them, the U.S. forces in Iraq wage incursion campaigns in many areas, arresting 19 Iraqis, saying that 4 of them were prominent members of the former Ba'ath Party, and another is an officer in the Republican Guard involved in selling weapons to those responsible for attacking Americans. Among the detained are 3 people who attacked the U.S. soldiers with explosives in the area of Balad. According to the U.S. forces, during 4 search campaigns, they found weapons, mines, and ammunition warehouses used in ambushes. The wide-scale American campaign, however, did not prevent attacks on U.S. soldiers. In recent hours, violent attacks took place in Fallujah. A U.S. patrol was targeted by a new ambush, killing 1 soldier and wounding others. An exchange of fire followed, killing 2 civilians, 1 of them Iraqi, and the other was a Syrian citizen.
An American Hummer was on the Baghdad-Fallujah highway when we were attacked. They responded by randomly opening fire on citizens. We were working when they randomly opened fire.
The current president of the Iraqi Governing Council, Iyad al-Alawi, demanded that the Iraqi army, which has been dismantled 6 months ago, be returned to maintaining order since they are the only ones who can understand and deal with the Iraqi situation. However, the coalition forces are not paying attention to this demand and brushing it off, despite their numerous losses.
At least 5 citizens were killed and 140 injured in the 4th consecutive Israeli air raid on Gaza on Monday. The fresh raid-targeted assassination was carried by helicopter gunships, which struck a car in an Ansaraf refugee camp, killing at least 5 citizens and injuring more than 100. Schools and kindergartens in the crowded street had let their children out for the day following the first airstrike in Gaza City, which targeted Abdullah Shami, one of Islamic Jihad leaders, but hit another house and destroyed it. When the second strike occurred, eyewitnesses said. Earlier Monday morning, Israeli jet fighters fired missiles at a house adjacent to that of Shami's. 14 casualties among citizens were reported, including 2 infants aged 2 and 3 years old. Local sources said that Israeli warplanes bombed a house close to that of Shami in the Jdeida area of Shuja'iyya neighborhood east of Gaza. Sources added that at least 14 civilians, including an elderly woman, were wounded, while Shami survived the Israeli attack. The house bombarded by Israeli warplanes belongs to a Mushtaha family close to Shami's house. The house is a 2-story building where a number of locals lived was completely destroyed. Israeli warplanes, including F-16 jet fighters and helicopters, have been hovering over many parts of the Gaza Strip since early Sunday. Israeli occupation forces began over the past few days a large-scale military aggression in the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah, killing several civilians, including children, and bulldozing dozens of homes, displacing thousands of local residents. The Palestinian leadership called on the world community and the United Nations General Assembly to intervene promptly to stop the continuous Israeli air raids against civilians in the Palestinian territories. Leadership asserted in an official statement that Israeli military escalation caused more tension and instability in the region. The leadership appealed for the whole world for working together to stop the racial separation wall and lifting the comprehensive siege imposed on the Palestinians and the Muslim and Christian holy sites. Israeli occupation troops tightened the military siege imposed on the Kafriyat area south of Tulkarem 3 weeks ago. Witnesses said the Israeli soldiers closed on Monday the road leading to the area, where more Israeli soldiers boosted their presence in the surrounding of the Teen Valley, the fields, agricultural land, Al-Kafriyat area, and Masing. The Israeli soldiers forced citizens under the threat of weapon to go back to the villages, including the patients. Israeli troops also reclosed the entrance of Jbara village south of Tulkarem, as well as barred citizens from entering or exit. In Hebron, Israeli troops arrested a citizen after waging wide searching and storming campaigns to citizens' home at Deir Samit village west of the city. Meanwhile, Israeli troops demolished 2 homes at Zorab neighborhood south of Rafah after rolling for more than 100 meters into the neighborhood.
In the Palestinian territories, the Al-Aqsa Brigades, the military wing of Fatah, declared its responsibility for the operation that took place near the Ufra settlement, killing 3 Israeli soldiers. The Al-Aqsa Brigades announced that a group from a unit named after martyred Muhannad Abu Halwa attacked the Israeli soldiers with machine guns and hand grenades, killing or
injuring all the members of the unit. Other news reports confirm that 3 Israeli soldiers were killed when their unit was attacked near Ufra settlement in northern Ramallah.
The Israeli army started mobilizing several thousand reserve forces in the West Bank and Gaza Strip after the Israeli Security Agency received security warnings about plans made by Palestinian factions to carry out operations inside Israel. In the meantime, a spokesman from the Israeli army said that Palestinian resistance factions launched 8 Qassam missiles on Israeli settlements along the Gaza Strip. As new signs indicate that Israel plans to continue its policy of escalation in the occupied territories, the Palestinians are trying to initiate diplomatic efforts abroad. The Israeli army activated 5 battalions from the reserve forces to support army units in the Gaza Strip, under the pretext that security agencies have received intelligence reports about the intent of Palestinian factions to carry out operations in Israel. However, the activation of reserve forces coincided with Israel's recent attack on Syria, who threatened to respond if attacked again. Political analysts say that Israeli Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz may be planning to launch a wide-scale military operation in Palestinian territories that were occupied in 1967, and specifically in Gaza. The Israeli reserve group, known as the Vantam Movement, did not welcome the news. Rather, they asked Mofaz to resign. The movement says that Mofaz's order negatively affects the relations between the reserve soldiers and the defense agency, especially because there are a lot of questions about the need to activate the reserve forces.
The Israeli decision to activate more reserve forces means one thing. The Israeli government will continue its escalation. It will continue its incursion operations and destruction campaigns like what happened in Rafah and its refugee camp. The Israeli government will continue to impose closures and curfews at unprecedented scale, threatening the Palestinian population in Gaza and the West Bank with a human catastrophe.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian resistance organization Hamas threatened to avenge the Israeli destruction operations in Rafah. The organization launched 8 Qassam missiles in western Nakab, 3 of which hit Histardat city. However, Hamas leaders were cautious, choosing not to discuss the operation. Israeli planes were flying over Gaza, unsuccessfully trying to find the sites where the missiles were launched. Meanwhile, 3 prominent delegates from the Palestinian Fatah organization traveled to the United States on a 3-day visit, hoping to obtain U.S. support in reaching a ceasefire agreement to end the violence. The Palestinian delegates also want to know how members of the U.S. Congress view the Geneva Agreement, which was reached last week. The Palestinian delegates include Hatam Abdel Kader and Kader Fares. This is the first visit of its kind since the beginning of the Intifada 3 years ago.
We are spending extraordinary efforts. These Palestinian measures are very important to enter the United States castle and present the Palestinian position. Knowledge of that position is lacking in the United States, which has created a suitable atmosphere for Israel and Sharon to continue oppressing the Palestinian people. We must have a clear Palestinian policy and voice to explain the Palestinian position in order to create balance.
The Palestinian Foreign Minister, Nabil Shaath, is currently in the United States. He will be accompanied by 3 prominent Fatah members to conduct negotiations with policymakers in Washington. The Palestinian delegates are trying to improve the Palestinian-American relations, which were negatively affected after the Gaza incident, where 3 Americans were killed. The Israelis are awaiting the results of these negotiations. However, they fully realize that Washington will only listen to Tel Aviv. Mohammed Hamdi, Nile News Channel, occupied Ramallah.
Escalating the situation, Israeli jet fighters carried out 3 airstrikes against Gaza City, killing 3 Palestinians and wounding at least 22 others, including a woman and 2 children aged 1 and 6. The first strike targeted an uninhabited building near the house of senior Islamic Jihad figure Abdullah Shami, who was unhurt. 2 hours later, Israeli warplanes hit a car, killing 2 members of the Hamas military wing and a bystander, and injuring at least 8 civilians in other cars. A third strike hit a small shed in a northeastern neighborhood of the city, and no injuries were reported.
Israeli warplanes again launched an aggression against the heavily populated Palestinian Gaza City. In the first attack, a missile fired by an F-16 warplane struck an uninhabited building in the eastern neighborhood of Ash-Shuja'iyya, wounding 12 Palestinian civilians. Palestinian security officials had initially said the apparent target of the airstrike was a leader for the movement Islamic Jihad, Abdullah Shami, whose house is a few meters away from the impact. But an Israeli occupation army spokesman said Shami was not the target, but it was an alleged Hamas weapons workshop. An Islamic Jihad official said that Shami was not hurt.
To tell you and the world, this violence, Israeli violence, which aims our people, must be stopped, and the national committee must do anything to stop Israeli forces against our people in Gaza and in Rafah and in Jenin.
Al-Shifa Hospital was meanwhile coping with the new victims of the latest Israeli aggression. Among the injured were a woman and 2 children aged 1 and 6. Just 2 hours later, Israeli warplanes struck a car in the Gaza city center, killing 2 members of Hamas military wing. The sources named one of the 2 men killed in the raid as Khalid al-Masri, a member of the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades. A bystander was also killed, and the attack left at least 8 Palestinian civilians injured, 4 of them seriously. According to witnesses, the wounded were in other cars in the vicinity.
Violence will breed violence, and bullets will breed more bullets. And this vicious cycle cannot be broken by more Israeli assassinations attempt, like the attack in this crowded neighborhood in Gaza, which led to the wounding so far of 16 Palestinians, including children. This will just add to the complexities. This will add to the enlarging the vicious cycle. This vicious cycle must be broken through a resumption of a meaningful peace process, through the implementation of the roadmap, through the presence of international forces and international monitors on the ground. Security and peace cannot be attained through more confiscation of land, settlement activities, incursions, assassinations, and building walls. This is wrong.
3 Israeli occupation soldiers were killed in a Palestinian ambush north of the West Bank town of Rafah after sundown on Sunday. The Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades claimed responsibility for the operation, saying it is in retaliation for the ongoing Israeli aggressions in the Gaza Strip.
Israeli military spokeswoman acknowledged 3 Israeli soldiers were killed and another wounded in an ambush on a West Bank road north of the city of Ramallah on Sunday. Palestinian resistance fighters ambushed 4 Israeli occupation soldiers who were on a routine foot patrol in the village of Injure, located near the Israeli settlement of Afra. The Palestinians opened fire, killing 3 of the occupation troops immediately and wounding the 4th. Israeli radio said as the wounded was rushed to hospital, an exchange of fire took place between the Israeli soldiers and the Palestinians. It lasted for 20 minutes. The commander of the Israeli occupation troops in the West Bank, Moshe Kaplinsky, said the attackers seized the soldiers' weapons before fleeing the scene in a car. Israeli forces imposed a curfew on Ain Yabrud, calmed the area and launched a massive search campaign in a bid to capture the fighters. The Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, an offshoot of the Fatah movement, claimed responsibility for the attack that came just hours after the Israeli troops redeployed thousands of reservists in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade said in a statement its members carried out the ambush in retaliation of the Israeli massacres, invasions and house demolitions against the Palestinian people in Rafah in the Gaza Strip.
Now, Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad comments on Jewish influence continue to be the subject of an Israeli Western campaign. In the latest move, the White House strongly suggested Monday that U.S. President George W. Bush would publicly condemn during the APEC summit Mahathir Mohamad's comments. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice said Bush considers the remarks as reprehensible.
On what Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad did at last week's Organization of Islamic Conference summit to involuntarily cause a fierce Israeli Western campaign against him was to highlight Jewish influence in world politics.
1.3 billion Muslims cannot be defeated by a few million Jews. There must be a way. The Europeans killed 6 million Jews out of 12 million. But today the Jews rule this world by proxy. They get others to fight and die for them.
Reactions from top officials around the globe once again confirmed that speaking about Jews, Israel, Zionism is taboo, and approaching it could be a fatal mistake that will be met by accusations of anti-Semitism, a tool often used to quiet criticism of Israel and its policies. French President Jacques Chirac was in the eye of the storm. He came under a barrage of criticism from Israel, where he was accused of having blocked a condemnation of Mahathir's comments in the EU summit final declaration. Israeli Foreign Minister Silvan Shalom joined the assault, describing Chirac's reaction as a shame. However, following a flurry of communication between Chirac's diplomatic advisor and Israeli Foreign Ministry officials, the incident was cleared up, and Shalom praised the letter later issued by Chirac and sent to the Malaysian Prime Minister condemning his statements. Chirac's letter said, quote, "Although you and your government have taken care to rebut any accusation of anti-Semitism, these remarks can only be condemned by those who remember the Holocaust," unquote. French presidential spokeswoman Catherine Colonna explained that Chirac joined in the condemnation of the remarks issued Friday by the Italian presidency of the EU in the name of all the countries of the European Union. For his part, Egyptian Foreign Minister Ahmed Maher said accusing Mahathir Mohamad of anti-Semitism served to deflect attention from Israeli acts against the Palestinians, adding what is said about this speech shows bad faith. Maher said, quote, "We hope that those who condemned Mahathir's speech lend more attention to the words of the American general who demonstrated hostility towards Islam and Muslims." He was referring to U.S. General William Boykin, who in June was named Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and cast the so-called War on Terror as a fight of Christianity against Islam.
Media watchdog Reporters Sans Frontières, RSF, accused Israel and the United States of unacceptable behavior towards journalists in the occupied Palestinian territories and in Iraq. In its second annual Press Freedom Ranking Report, RSF awarded the United States and Israel 2 separate rankings each, one for respective press freedoms on their own territory and one for behavior beyond their borders. The report ranked the United States 31st for its respect for freedom of expression at home and 135th out of a total of 164 countries for its behavior beyond its borders. An RSF spokesman said 12 journalists were killed during the U.S.-led Iraq war earlier this year, and the U.S. military was responsible for the deaths of 5 of them. Israel ranked 44th and 146th in the 2 categories. RSF said in a statement that the Israeli army was guilty of injuring and threatening journalists in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The statement said the Israeli army's repeated abuse of journalists and the U.S. Army's responsibility in the death of several reporters during the war on Iraq constitute unacceptable behavior.
Britain said 3 European Union foreign ministers were leaving for Tehran on a last Dutch mission to try to resolve a standoff over Iran's nuclear program. British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw said in a statement that he will be traveling to Tehran today with his French and German counterpart Dominique de Villepin and Joschka Fischer for talks on the nuclear issue at the invitation of the Iranian government. The statement said resolving the doubts surrounding Iran's nuclear program is of grave concern to the European Union. The visit by the 3 foreign ministers comes before an October 31st deadline set by the International Atomic Energy Agency for Iran to disapprove U.S.-led allegations that it may be developing a covert nuclear arms program. U.S. President George W. Bush forced the war on terror to the heart of a Pacific Rim summit, despite the resentment of some Asian nations which wanted to stick to freeing trade. Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien told reporters that the leaders did not discuss anti-terror measures at the first session of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC Forum Summit, which kicked off today, but will do so tomorrow. Bush, seeking practical and diplomatic support for the war on terror, made the issue the centerpiece of the summit's declaration. The final draft of the declaration says the 21 members agreed to dismantle fully and without delay transitional terrorist groups. It also calls for the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, a clear reference to the nuclear ambitions of North Korea, which were another major focus of Bush's talks in Bangkok. Many APEC nations showed strong opposition to the dominance of the war on terror issue on the agenda. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad was blunt in this regard. He said APEC was formed as an economic cooperation group and should not agree to taking away economic matters into security, military or politics.
A U.S. military vehicle transporting weapons and ammunition was attacked by anti-tank missiles in El Fallujah, west of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad.
According to eyewitnesses, the U.S. military vehicle that was attacked was accompanied by 2 other vehicles. 2 of the vehicles pulled back after the attack, but the third one was engulfed with fire after it exploded. The American forces did not announce any human casualties in the incident, but eyewitnesses say that no soldier was able to escape from the third vehicle. The U.S. forces dispersed people from the area when some of them began expressing happiness about the attack. One eyewitness explains.
There were 3 military vehicles. While the 3 were advancing, the vehicle that was in the front was hit. The 2 that were behind pulled back. Then they surveyed the area. I think that they hit some civilians. The explosion was huge.
A U.S. spokesman said that he has no information about the attack. Another U.S. military vehicle was attacked by a mortar shell in Al-Samara city, north of the Iraqi capital, and U.S. forces surrounded the area, searching for the attackers. Meanwhile, the presence of U.S. forces in the holy city of Karbala has created an atmosphere of tension.
Citizens of Karbala do not want to repeat what happened in the 1990s. The presence of U.S. forces inside Karbala is creating tension among citizens. They are complaining because the United States forces are creating fear. They are asking, why are the United States forces here? For the past 6 months, no one entered the city. All of them were outside. If they leave, there will be safety. We have everything.
The citizens of Karbala did not live under the authority of the occupation forces since they entered Iraq, and they do not want these forces to stay in their city, especially when things return to normal.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities. and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.